Why executions? Why not just kill people?
Yeah, it was a question I asked myself. It was probably a bit too savage for what we wanted to do with the game. And so, yeah, we looked at games like Gang Beasts. We wanted to present something like a Souls-like combat system, something that had a lot more depth to it in the way that you approach the combat. I see it more as like puzzle combat, strategic combat. And so we looked at games that were more streamlined, but still had a little bit of strategy in the way that you approach the combat. And games like Gang Beasts really kind of shone for us because there is the physics there. You've got the chemistry, like the lava level. You can, even when you're climbing, you're using both of your hands to pull yourself up and climb. There's a lot of agency to the controller, but they lean heavily on the physics and the unpredictability of the physics. And that's something that we didn't want to do. And so when we approached the design of the game initially, we were really talking about how could we take the more precise kind of engaging combat of Elden Ring and then marry that up with the more streamlined structure and character control of something like Gang Beasts. And that was quite a bit of a challenge because you've got the randomness of Gang Beasts. You can't just throw a spear and have that go randomly somewhere. That actually has to be precise and where it kind of lands, right? So yeah, and for me, the execution points, they're really the way to kind of end the game or end the match. I see it as like the pinning mechanic in like wrestling, right? When you pin someone with a 3 count, that means you win. That's classified as a win. It's not getting their life down to 0 or anything like that. You could do your finisher, get them to 0, and now they're knocked out, but now you still have to cover them for the pin, right? So it's a similar dynamic here where you knock your opponents down. If they're staggered, then the HP is to 0. You can then pick them up and execute them. And that execution is basically the metaphor for finishing off with a pin.
Did you guys face any design challenges in creating satisfying yet brutal executions?
Yeah, so there were a few challenges with the execution points and how brutal can you really be, right? There's also the question of networking and sending all that through. I think the biggest thing for us was the length of an animation. That's something that's super important when you're tackling basically any game. We can if we go back to a bunch of old platformers just for a second, we can look at something like Super Mario or Sonic, very responsive platformers. You basically move from one animation to another fairly instantly. It's a matter of 3 frames and you move from one to the other. You don't have to worry about any in-betweens, right? So it's pretty snappy and responsive. And that's kind of what you want from a platformer that relies on timing and things. Then we look on the other side of it and we have something like Prince of Persia, the original Prince of Persia. And this was fully rotoscoped. They had people doing the moves. They recorded it with a camera. He actually recorded his brother doing all the moves, Jordan Mechner, and he then put that into the computer, drew over the top of it and made sprites. But the result was this really realistic looking platformer that we had never seen before, right? And that gave way to games like Tomb Raider and Uncharted and the more stickier, non-responsive, I guess more streamlined kind of games, right? More cinematic. And so you can go either route. Do you go the more animation heavy character controller where you're waiting a lot of the time and watching the animations and it's more cinematic like an Uncharted? Or are we going for something that has to be quicker, more precise, like a sport, right? And for us, it was pretty clear that we needed to go the faster, more responsive route. Being a tournament structure, really relying on the combat, it wasn't this experience that we were creating that had to be like cinematic, right? And so the more slower animations, I think, just didn't work for what we were trying to do. And so that really leaned into the execution points, right? Because they had to be snappy, they had to be responsive. We couldn't, rip a guy's head off, shove him into, a spike pit, and then, watch him in agony as he slowly dies, because then that's going to take about 5 minutes. And then the other players have probably already done the same to you, right? And so you know much execution. So really the length had to be something we put at the forefront. Things had to be quick and snappy, and therefore the complexity had to be reduced. But then how do we still sell what's happening, right? Throwing someone into flames can be pretty quick, but then now that you're not having to worry about watching an animation anymore, you've already picked them up and thrown them into the point. You can just have them like burning up there and burn to ash. You can have a really quick and still satisfying animation, right? And you see their body kind of burn to ash with the skeleton left over into dust. So something can still have layers of animation, but it can take a few seconds as opposed to, a few minutes. And it's purely throwing them into a spot, watching that actually play out. And if you watch it and there's an enemy next to you, that's something you have to be wary of as well, right? You have to always be worried about your surroundings. You can't really enjoy the execution points. And so for us, we're really looking at it from like an observer's standpoint. When we look at wrestling, a lot of things they call it selling, but basically you take a shot to the head and you're the reactor. You're selling that shot to the head like it really hurt, and that animation, the audience is actually watching while the other wrestler is going to go and do set basically the next spot up in the match, which is like the next sequence of moves, right? And so it's really used to misdirect a lot of the time. So we're going to lean into a lot of these things. The execution points, they're going to be really quick to engage with, but then the animations afterwards can take a little bit longer to really sell what's happening with the execution points, so that if you're an observer or a player, you're still going to get that satisfaction from the execution point. So we want to make sure it's really targeted to all types of players, not just really the player, right?
How do physics and ragdoll mechanics tie into executions to make them feel unpredictable but satisfying?
Yeah, and again, looking at how Gangbase does things, and that unpredictability can sometimes add to like the surprise or the comeback kind of nature of a sport. And some of that stuff, you could go for a play, not fully know the outcome of it, but given a little bit of luck, things swing your way, like the bounce off of a kick off the ball actually goes in the direction that you needed it to. And a lot of, soccer is the best example for this, right? Like a corner head into the center to line, and it's perfectly, right? It's lobbed perfectly into the center for another player to just get the kick in, right? And so this type of like randomness in kind of where the shot might go is interesting. Maybe not for precision actions like throwing a spear or using a bow, but definitely for picking up someone, throwing them into something, and have the knockback be used to your benefit, right? And that's something that when you start playing, you might not necessarily think about. You'll go in there, you fight, throw people into things. But as you start to get better at the game, it's the difference between like getting 1 or 2 execution points back to like execution kills back to back. Because you could throw someone into a wall and that knockback kind of like pinball or pull hits someone else, or maybe 2 other people, that knocks them into execution points, right? And you've now taken out 2 people. And so using the knockback in your advantage to offset or smooth out some of the more predictable gameplay mechanics is really what it's there for, right? Like I don't want to use a bow for a ranged attack if I need something to ricochet. I probably want to pick up something like a barrel or something that's got a bit more surface area so that I could throw it at something, get that knockback, and maybe have it ricochet into the thing that I really need. Because the trick shot at this point is better in this scenario, right? So the knockback for ricochet is something really important for us, where we use the physics and the ragdoll to help players pull off an execution so that they're not always kind of flailing around for it. They've already used precision to get their opponents into a staggered state. They've used the spear in a precise way, long distance headshot, right? So now the person is staggered, they can run over, pick them up, and that should be a little bit more lenient. It's really up to now the defender to kind of get out of that grab. And so the throwing and the knockbacks and all of that stuff that happens when you throw the defender, that's all to really help you and give you the advantage in that, because you've already done a lot of work getting it. It also then encourages near misses. You go to throw someone at an execution point and you just miss. It's like basketball, right? Where you create that shot, the 2-pointer, the 3-pointer. Can I even get this guy into the point from here? Or do I need to get closer? But, taking that little bit of extra time means that the guy onto my left now is going to come and hit me, and I will lose that defender that I'm grabbing, right? So it's one of those things where do you take the shot or not take the shot? And so we really lean into a lot of sports in ways that you not necessarily think about, because they have a lot of these like physics mechanics that kind of come into play that we don't really think about when we think of a soccer ball, right? There's a lot of things that the players do based off of the knockback and the bounciness and the friction and all those different things.
I didn't realize we had so much physics in this game, but that now makes sense on why it's taking so long to build, as the community says. But speaking about executions, what is your favorite execution in the game and why?
There's a few of them that we've designed, and a lot that we would like to save basically for you guys to figure out. But I think one of the ones that in testing I really like is the banishment circle. I like how it's basically a ritual kill, that you're killing someone on this circle in a very ritualistic way, almost offering them up to the gods of the dark times. And so that looks really cool, because it's just a different type of kill. It's not like throwing them into a spike pit or into fire to burn them to a crisp. This is like offering them up as a ritual sacrifice. So that's really interesting. And then The other thing too is where these kind of execution points go. So I really like the Colosseum level for this because there are like 3 nodes in the Colosseum. They're underground chambers and there are traps underground. And every time you play the Colosseum, different chambers will come up and they will have different things on them. And that could be execution points. You could get the Hangman's Tree come up from the chamber. And so now there's this execution point right in the middle of the Colosseum that you could throw somebody onto and hang them off of the tree. Or, we could have a campfire come up from one of the modules and you can set fire now to the arena. So we really want to play with the execution points, not in just like the static way that a lot of the maps will have that because they're very biome based, but we will have these kind of wrestling match style matches or maps like the Colosseum that will play a lot more with the kind of gameplay side of things and the stipulation side of things. So if you like, cage matches or anything to that like really crazy nature, then the Colosseum is probably the one that you're going to want to play because that can be really chaotic. Otherwise, we have the more kind of open experience in terms of the map to kind of go through as well. But yeah, I think the Banishment Circle is the one for me.
I love it so much. I'm like thinking of it right now. I've actually seen the map, and so I'm actually really excited because when you see those little outside points turning, you're like, oh my god, I can't believe that just popped out of that thing. So I can't wait for everybody to see what that is. So super, super, super exciting. But Dark Times, brutal, mathematic, and physics. Let's just name that the title.